Okay, I'd like to call to order the February 22nd, 2011 Placer County Board of Supervisors. Supervisor Holmes, would you lead us in a flag salute?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And would you read our meeting procedures, please?
Welcome to the Placer County Board of Supervisors meeting of February 22nd, 2011. Agendas are available on the wall outside this meeting room. If you are here to speak on an issue not appearing on the agenda, you may do so during the public comment period. There's a 3-minute time limit per speaker. The board is not permitted to take action on items addressed under public comment. When you speak, clearly state your name and address for the record. All items on the agenda will be open for the public to address before final action is taken. There's a 3-minute time limit per speaker, which will be monitored by a timer on the podium. If there's a person speaking on behalf of a group with no other testimony from another member of the group, please identify yourself as such, and your time may be extended at the pleasure of the board. Keep in mind that the chairman has the discretion of limiting the total discussion time on any item. If you are hearing impaired, we have listening devices available. It is requested that all pagers and cell phones be either turned off or put in the silent mode. Thank you for your participation and cooperation.
Thank you, Ann. Now is the time for public comment. This is the time when anybody can address the board on an item that is not on the agenda, keeping in mind that we can take no action. So if there's someone from the audience who'd like to address the board, please come forward and state your name. Seeing none, I'll close public comment and open it up to Supervisor Committee reports. Jack.
Yes, I just wanted to report back that we had I filled in for Supervisor Holmes on the Sacramento Area Council of Governments, had a couple of discussions with regards to the state budget, had a budget update, and that's the extent of the discussion.
Thanks. Then I'll mention first, Jim Holmes, Tom Miller, and I just returned from our last week annual trip to Washington, our advocacy trip. I think we had 14 meetings in 2.5-ish days, so it's pretty intense. I think the meetings went really well over the years. I know that it's very important to develop the relationships that we have for all of our legislative priorities, and we discussed the wide range of board-approved legislative items, including regional wastewater, the Placer County Conservation Plan, transportation issues, etc. The meetings on the Placer County Conservation Plan went extremely well, I think, keeping in mind that we now have submitted the document for consideration by the regulatory agencies. I think Lauren validated last time we met and discussed that our plan actually is quite innovative and probably has really never been done before. So to the extent that we work the regulatory agencies and can work together to convince each other that level of entrepreneurialism is a good idea and everybody ought to take the risk that we're going to need to take to try something different. I think the meetings that we had back there were well worth the effort, and we got very good positive feedback on the concerns that we've had with the core issues in the 404 permit. So with that, Jim, do you want to add?
Yeah, I just wanted the meetings we had regarding the Placer County Conservation Plan were very well received. It looks like it's going to be a template for other jurisdictions throughout the nation to use. The gal that's assigned to Senator Feinstein about that issue was very energetic, had a lot of questions about what we're doing, and so it's going to be moving forward. You know, we go back, we get criticized because we have elected officials back there that are supposed to represent us, but our programs, as they go through, the people that bring those programs to the elected officials are the ones that we talk to. So they understand what we're doing, what we're about, and then they bring them forward to the committees and to the elected officials back there. We had a very interesting discussion with Elliot Levine, who is the technology manager for the Office of the Biomass Program. He was very energized about what we had to say about our biomass program, had very many questions. to the extent that he went down the hallway, he left the meeting, went down the hallway and grabbed the lady that's in charge of trying to make biomass, the woody debris in the forest, make that renewable energy, so that would open up more grant opportunities for us. So, there were so many questions that we didn't have all the answers. And so we're going to ask Brett Story when he goes back, our program manager, when he goes back to D.C. in April, to set up a meeting with Elliot Levine and give him some more details about our program. We met with the Senior Intergovernmental and Public Liaison Specialist from the Office of Community Orienting Policing Services about our COPS grant, which is for our interoperability program for all our radio frequencies throughout Placer County. I think the majority of the funding for that is going to go for police officers on the street. We did ask for $2 million for infrastructure improvements for our program further on up the hill to about 4,000 feet above sea level. So we had a very good discussion with them. On Thursday, we went to the 7th floor of the Department of Interior, just outside of the Commissioner's office, met with the liaison of the state and local government for the Department of Interior, the Bureau of Reclamation. We also met with the Chief of Staff for the Deputy Commissioner for the Bureau of Reclamation. The room filled up with 7 staff members. I was surprised to see so many people interested in our Auburn State Recreation Program. As you probably read, there was $2.7 million in the President's budget for the Auburn State Recreation Area funding for FY12. We're hoping that that passes through the Congress so that we have that funding for FY12. We tried to find some long-term solutions, but with the political climate and the Congress this year, they really didn't have any answers for us. But anyhow, I was amazed that this room filled up with 7 staff members. It's like, I just wanted to talk to this one lady, but it worked out pretty good. On the last meeting we had on Wednesday afternoon was with Congressman McClintock. This was late in the day, about 4 o'clock. We did have about 15 minutes with the Congressman. He has been very busy with the continuing resolution. As you know, the Republicans are wanting amendments to the budget resolution. I think by the time we left, there was some 600 resolutions in. Congressman McClintock had 48 of those. I just want to give you some information about 3 of the amendments that he proposed. Amendment number 306. This amendment would reduce funding for the Corps of Engineers, Civil Department of the Army, Operation and Maintenance by $586,600,000. This is money that we need for not only for our wastewater, but also for the Placer Parkway. Amendment number 300. You'll like this one. The amendment would prohibit any of the funds made available under the Department of Energy, energy programs, energy efficiency, and renewable energy to be used for biomass and biorefinery systems. So those are the funds that the Department of Energy, under the direction of Senator Feinstein, has given to the Placer County Biomass Program. It kind of would put a halt to our moving forward with our biomass program. And then Amendment 356. The amendment would eliminate funding for the Department of Interior, United States Fish and Wildlife Service land acquisition account. So there goes, those are problems with not only with our PCCP, but also with the Placer Parkway proposal. It's interesting that it's as if these amendments came out after we met with Mr. McClintock. I'm not sure about that, but it was very disappointing that we don't have the support of our local congressman for our, many of our progressive programs that we have in Placer County. So anyhow, that concludes my report.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And Jennifer?
I really just wanted to follow up on some of Supervisor Holmes' comments, particularly as it relates to the Auburn State Recreation Area. I was not at those meetings in D.C., obviously, but was following them very closely and was very, very pleased to see the $2.7 million figure. And really, people are paying attention to our concerns. And part of the really important thing about having elected representatives from Placer County go back to D.C. is that we're not just meeting with our federal electeds, but we are meeting with the agencies, and that's where the rubber hits the road. It's with the agencies, and so I really wanted to thank supervisors and Tom for going back to D.C., taking some of the public hit that comes potentially with that sort of travel in this day and age, but really want to say thank you because you are doing a great job to move forward these issues. And wanted to take the opportunity to publicly thank Mike Finnegan from Reclamation, who has been a great partner with us in working to identify funding for the Auburn State Recreation Area. So thank you all.
Yeah, I just would like to echo what Jennifer was saying. Folks are, for whatever reason, under the impression that if members of the board or staff are headed back to Washington for some reason, that's just some kind of a pleasure cruise. And having spent 4 days the week before you guys were back there, having spent 4 days in Washington the week prior on my own personal business, and knowing what the weather was like back there, and knowing what the schedule is like with meetings, and knowing that it's not necessarily easy to get from Russell over to Cannon and then back to Hart for these various meetings. It's a lot of work, what you guys do back there, what we do back there. And while I think it is fair to question travel and whether or not it meets certain litmus tests of relevance and cost-benefit, clearly the effort that we have put forth on our Washington trips, be it through having our own 2 members go back there in February or participation in Cap to Cap, clearly it has borne results. And I would simply encourage those who question why it's necessary for us to go to Washington, D.C., start asking questions about the 10th Amendment. Start asking questions about why we let so much power and money go to Washington in the first place, rather than telling the federal government, no, those are states' prerogatives, because I know I would, and I'm sure everybody here would much rather just drive down to Sacramento to have meetings to deal with issues or be able to deal with things locally, as opposed to us having to go back to Washington to deal with these things. But while we live in a political age that allows more and more power to be vested in Washington, D.C., and more money to flow there, then unfortunately that's where we have to go in order to get our message heard. And so while on the one hand, yes, it is fair for folks to ask questions about whether or not it's necessary, I would encourage those very same people to get on board with asserting a little bit of 10th Amendment states' rights and rolling back the size and cost of the federal government, bringing things here locally, and that way we can just drive to Sacramento and have these conversations and not have to fly to Washington. So thank you for therapy.
We're counting on your feeling better. And Jim?
I just wanted to follow up with our meeting about this Auburn State Recreation Area. They do know where Clementine Dam is, the North Fork Dam, Clementine Lake, the Auburn Dam. Robert Quint, who is a program manager, probably about my age, actually worked on the design of the first Auburn Dam back in the early 70s. And then one of the staff members was it her father or grandfather?
Grandfather.
Her grandfather was the first dam tender at North Fork Dam. So they clearly know where Lake Clementine is and North Fork Dam and the issue that we're talking about. So that was kind of refreshing to actually talk to people that know where we were. Thank you.
If I might, Chair, one thing about Mike Finnegan that you spoke so highly of is that they defined him as their best rock catcher.
Yeah, that's right. He was the best rock catcher.
Okay, next is the consent agenda. This is a list of items that are intended all to be passed with one motion, but the board will be happy to take them, any of them off and discuss them individually. So if board members have that request, or anybody from the audience, be happy to address any of those items individually. Jack?
Yes, I would like to take a look. I have just a procedural question on item 9, the Auditor Controller State Mandated Audits. And I'd like to pull item 21, A through F.
And any others? Anyone from the audience? Okay. Pleasure.
Approval of consent absent items 9 and 21 through F.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the consent agenda as amended. Roll call, please.
Bueller? Duran? Holmes? Montgomery?
Yes.
Wygant?
Yes. And so first we'll talk about item N, Auditor Controller mandated audits. And Andy, are you going to?
Yes, I can have that one.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So the question,
The
Yeah.
question was more of and maybe this is more of a combination of a question to you and a question to Tony. I was looking at the resolution, actually page 6, section or Article 8, which requires a yearly annual audit, and we're going to a 5-year audit. Is that correct?
Correct.
My question was whether or not we needed to actually change the language of that section, or you were just going to place a copy of the resolution behind the existing document.
I'm not sure the answer to that question.
Yeah, I became aware of the question before the weekend, and I think probably at some point we should come back and clean up the bylaws to make it compatible with the recommended request. I don't think it's necessary. You could put the resolution in, but unfortunately, when you have a resolution that explains something, there's always this vague fear that they get separated in time and place, and people see one and not the other. So at some point, I think we probably should just come back and have a consent item to clean up the bylaws. As I indicated to you in my email, I suggest that we not delay this proceeding. This is a fairly mechanical effort by the auditor for an entity that has nothing other than SEC reports that are issued annually. And the SEC reports are self-explanatory from an auditing point of view. So I'd recommend we proceed, but I do thank you for the suggestion, and I'll work on getting back with fixing those bylaws to be compatible.
Thank you. And with that, I'll move to...
Moved and seconded to approve item 9. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. And revenue sharing, item 21.
Yes, I just wanted to confirm with staff that we are going to have that discussion in March. Is that correct?
That is correct. We showed on your tentative agenda for March 22nd in terms of part of the budget discussions at that time.
Thank you very much.
It's been moved and seconded, or is there a second? Moved and seconded to approve the revenue sharing items delineated item 21 through A through E. All those in favor, say aye. Aye.
Items A through F.
A through F.
Thank you. A through F. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, let's move to our 9:20 timed item. We are honored today to have a former colleague from the Board of Supervisors, Jim Williams, who's crazy enough to come back here after being gone for a while. But we're going to have a presentation from Valley Vision with regards to the Sacramento Region Food Charter. So, Jim, welcome back.
Thank you, Chairman. It's a pleasure to be back here. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to present to Placer County, who in so many ways has been a leader in working to preserve, enhance, and promote local agriculture. Just by way of a little bit of background, I'm the immediate past chair of Valley Vision, which is what we like to call a regional action tank. We've assembled a pretty good group of leaders, 29 board members from throughout the region, and we like to take on what we call orphan issues around the region that can benefit from a collaborative effort outside the normal silos that we see taking place. And just for those of you who may not be familiar, some of the work we've done, we worked with SACOG on the original blueprint, which Placer County was involved in. We have undertaken some really innovative research on healthcare and healthfulness around the Sacramento region, which we are now cooperating with Placer County on another project in that arena. And today we're going to present to you the work that we've been doing around the food. SACOG has had a program on rural-urban connections. We've been working with the California Endowment on what we call food deserts and how we get good quality food into underserved areas. That all links back to a lot of the health programs. And so today, Robin Kroc from our organization, who's been working for several years on these initiatives, is delighted to give you a presentation about the Sacramento Regional Food Charter. So, Robin?
Thanks, Jim.
Good morning, Supervisors.
Good morning.
And thank you for this, allowing this time for this presentation, and particularly Supervisor Wiegand, whose staff was very helpful in making this happen. And thank you for the introduction, Jim. As you can see, we have a great board at Valley Vision. So I am here today to talk about the Sacramento Region Food System Charter. As Jim said, the Sacramento Region Food System Collaborative is a project of Valley Vision that's currently funded by the California Endowment. And one of the main projects that the collaborative has been working on is developing this food system charter. And just to be clear, our goal is to have this charter adopted throughout the six-county region. I'm here today just to do an informational presentation and hopefully to come back next month and talk to you about actually adopting the charter. Excuse me, we didn't want to just come in and throw it at you and ask you to give us an answer right now, but allow you time to think about it and ask your questions. Let's hope I can do this right. Oh, good. So first of all, I'm going to read directly from the slide here. A food charter is a document that clearly states a community's values and beliefs about nutrition, food, and food systems. And if you look at food charters that have been developed around in different areas of the country, they all have a slightly different emphasis, different lengths. As you can see, ours, which I believe is in your board packet, is 1 page. The state of Michigan has a 25-page food charter. We didn't want to go that far, keep it a little bit more simple than that. A food system is a cycle of production, producing food, processing food, distribution, consumption, and waste. And again, this food system charter was developed through a collaborative effort and iterative process by all of the organizations, the communities, the community organizations, agencies, and businesses that make up the collaborative. Placer Grown has been very involved and supportive, as well as many other organizations. So let me talk for a minute about why we need a food charter. As Jim mentioned, Valley Vision has worked, we have a fairly extensive healthcare portfolio and have worked on a lot of healthcare projects, including several in Placer County. A lack of access to nutritious food has been closely linked to several diseases, including obesity, because people end up eating unhealthy food. They eat a lot of fast food, so you basically can end up obese and malnourished at the same time. High blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes, numerous heart diseases. And numbers from the California Department of Health Services show that the annual economic cost to the state of California just for obesity and physical activity is in the billions. This is health care, it's lost productivity, so lost days at work. It takes in a lot of different injuries, and that's just obesity. That's not diabetes, which has become a huge issue, and type 2 diabetes is, of course, food-related. So the California Food Policy Advocates did a series of county profiles on food insecurity, and this is 2010 data. Let's see if I can do this. Yes. The way to read this chart is, so if you look at, say, the second line, the school lunch program, what this shows is from the number of children that are eligible for the federal school lunch program in Placer County, the majority of them are signed up for that program, because you can see Placer County is 4th out of 58 counties in the state. However, if you look at the school breakfast program, don't fare quite as well up here, 53rd out of 58 in the state. So there are a lot of children in Placer County who are eligible for the school breakfast program and are not getting it. And a lot of times it's just due to outreach. Parents don't know about the program. They don't know that they're eligible for the program. And numerous studies have linked children eating breakfast and eating a healthy breakfast to their ability to focus in school, their ability to learn. So these things are important. And you can look through the list and see how the different counties in our region rank in different areas. So the food charter basically just lays the groundwork. It lays a foundation to impact several different areas, including health, as we talked about, jobs, improving the environment, leveraging government investment, and creating a sustainable community. And I know that's kind of a buzzword, so I'm going to talk about each of these a little bit. As we've talked about, obviously, it will increasing access to healthy food, increases health, and that's a great picture from first 5. By focusing on producing and consuming locally grown food, which of course affects Placer County in particular because there are so many small farms here that do need support, you increase employment opportunities. You reduce pollution because you reduce the vehicle miles traveled from getting food in and out of the region. And you conserve land, because if you're helping farmers stay economically viable, you help them keep the land in agriculture. It also helps to create a sustainable community. Placer County has been a leader in advancing blueprint-friendly policies. Valley Vision is also now involved with SACOG's Sustainable Communities Initiative, which will further this. And the food charter just helps support Blueprint. It helps support the Sustainable Communities Initiative, and helps keep in all of these areas keep these policies going. The cost for passing a food charter, you all may know this. Some of the community organizations we've presented to had this question. It's free. It's completely free. It's just adopting it. And just so you can see some of our supporters so far, the Sacramento City Unified School District Board of Trustees had a resolution to adopt. The Placer County Ag Commission wrote a letter, and I don't know if you have it in front of you or not. I believe it was handed out earlier, that basically recommends that the board adopt this. Josh Hunsinger has been great. Christine Turner was also very supportive, and you can see there are many other areas that we got letters after I made this slide who've also been supportive. And that's me. So that's my presentation. What questions can I answer for you?
Questions, board members? Jennifer.
Robin, thank you. I did have a couple questions on your chart, slide 6.
Okay.
Thank you. Obviously, I'm gratified to see that the school lunch program is so well enrolled. You indicated that the breakfast program, that this was based on numbers of children who were eligible for the program.
Correct.
Do we have any data that actually talks about, while children may be eligible, are they actually getting a meal at home before they come to school, or are they not getting a meal at home, and so we really do need to focus on this? And any way to identify that?
There isn't data that I know of. That's definitely something to be looked into. That's an excellent question, and I don't know how we would go about getting that data. I mean, it would obviously just be, qualitative answers, but that would be very good data to have.
Right, because it strikes me that program, the eligibility is contingent upon socioeconomic.
Yes.
And it doesn't mean that those kids aren't actually getting a breakfast. No, it doesn't mean that they actually are getting a breakfast
Right.
before they come to school. But I think it would be critical for us as a board, if we're going to look at trying to push that, trying to identify some funding for it, whatever we may or may not decide to do as a board, to understand, is it really a problem that exists, or is it a problem that's essentially theoretical
Right.
at this point? So that was a question that I had. On slide 9, jobs in the environment, increasing employment opportunities. Could not agree with you more, and I think this board has been very proactive in doing some land acquisitions that continue to support agriculture, some conservation easements that continue to support agriculture, and really focusing on these sort of more boutique agricultural entities in Placer County, as well as, the traditional running cattle, growing rice, those other sort of more, as I say, traditional agricultural entities. What is your take, and you may not have one at this point on it, if the proposal from this state to get rid of the Williamson Act subventions comes to fruition? How do you see that affecting this particularly?
I have an opinion. I don't know if it's it's not actually an expert opinion. It's I can't see how it couldn't hurt agriculture in general, obviously, but I think that's why things like adopting this food charter and the RUCS project, the Rural Urban Connection Strategy, are so important, because they are laying a foundation for, the Williamson Act most likely will go away. And so they're laying a foundation to start thinking about other ways of supporting agriculture. It is going to affect agriculture, and we do need to come up with other ways. And obviously, the counties are strapped right now, so you can't just, be throwing money at it. But we're kind of in, this is kind of part of the planning to deal with that. And I don't know what the answer is to that. I do know that this does start us moving in the direction of thinking about it and planning for that to happen.
So is there anything in the food charter specifically that talks about the Williamson Act, or is that something that you've considered maybe adding to the food charter?
We could definitely consider adding it. I don't, that was so much a part of the discussion, I don't remember if it went in.
I'm sorry, and I don't mean to put you on the spot.
No,
It's
no,
certainly
that's
something we can talk about one-on-one at another time.
We could definitely consider putting it in. Is that something that the board would like us to look at doing?
I think it's important for us
Okay.
to look at it at
Okay.
least and really evaluate what it could or could not do potentially.
And also, just so you know, one of the first actions that the Food Collaborative took was, within the Ag Sustainability Working Group, was to send a letter to the governor, to Governor Schwarzenegger at the time, and, CC'd to Senator Steinberg and many other people supporting the Williamson Act. Mm-hmm. And that letter was signed by a very diverse group, which was, I think, part of the power of the letter. We had farmers and environmentalists and business people, a lot of people all signing this letter in support of the Williamson Act.
And then my last question is on slide 12, your supporters thus far. I see the Sacramento City Unified School District has signed on. Have you presented this to any other boards of supervisors yet, or are we the first?
It was presented to Yuba County.
Uh-huh.
It was tabled.
It was tabled.
Yes. It was presented at the same time as another document, and there was a little confusion about the way they got kind of put together.
Excellent.
So we'll be approaching them again.
Thank you. Really appreciate the presentation and the work that you've put into this so far.
Jim?
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. I want to go back into ancient history. Back in another lifetime, I actually owned a service station. That was a service station is where you actually pump the gas. But I was between three schools, and many times I would see mothers in a hurry getting their kids to school, coming in for $2 or $3 worth of gas to get into the school. And you look in the back seat, I distinctly remember a little boy eating a donut and chocolate milk. And I'm thinking, boy, that teacher's going to have a nice day. Big food from McDonald's, you'd see them come in with that. So that leads to the obesity problem. Gas stations today, now you can get the gas and go in and get your chocolate milk and donut. So we've come up, this is definitely needs to be moved forward. I went to one of your programs, actually bought this book from Mark Winnie, which he explains in detail about food deserts, obesity, and how important it is to have local products. So I would support this 100%. I'm glad that you're doing it. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Jack?
Yes, I was just going to suggest, I know Jennifer just talked about some data points. Have you reached out to any, in addition to the Sacramento Unified High School District, any other school districts? You may want to have discussions with their Director of Business Services that handles the federal aid programs.
Okay.
And also, at least in my experience with the Roseville Joint Union High School District, they do have a Director of Food Services that can probably give you a little bit more information on the discrepancy between the meals that are served and the coverage that they have. So.
Right. I know, just for information purposes, at Sac City Unified, which we have a separate project going with, they have their federal reimbursement. They have 97 cents per student to feed them lunch, and they have to come up with meals from that. And but I will definitely be talking to school districts up here as well.
Thanks. Any other questions? But thank you, Robin. So your hope is that we will endorse a letter of support for this and
That you will actually adopt the charter.
adopt the charter itself. Okay, good. So we'll entertain that and appreciate you initiating the dialogue and appreciate, Jim, you taking the time to come up here, and thank you both for all the great work you've done. I think these kinds of efforts can create that catalytic energy that really can go a long ways to getting results if we put our minds to it and do that without expending huge resources or weighing heavily on existing burdens that we have. So I really appreciate that time and effort that you put into this.
Thank you. Thank you for
And
your time.
we'll definitely consider that and bring it back to the board for review. Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you. So we will go to our first department item, Administrative Services Procurement. Jim, we have a competitive bid to Delta Wireless for 90 rugged notebooks.
Well, good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I'm Jim
Morning.
Bogan, your purchasing manager. And as you said, item 4A is requesting your board's approval to award competitive bid number 110 to Delta Wireless Incorporated for 90 rugged notebook computers and the docking stations for the Sheriff's Patrol vehicles. Delta Wireless submitted the lowest bid of 3 for these computers and docking stations at $565,978.25. The Sheriff's Office asked Procurement to acquire the computers through a 5-year tax-exempt lease purchase. Procurement published invitation for bids number 147 for the successful bidder to buy the computers from Delta Wireless at our competitively obtained price and lease them to the county through a 5-year, $1 buyout lease. Hewlett-Packard Financial Services submitted the most favorable of 4 proposals at 3.97%, which results in a total lease cost over 5 years of $610,888.62 to be paid at $122,177.72 annually. We request your approval for the purchasing manager to execute this lease purchase, and staff will be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Kirk?
Yeah, just a quick description, if you would, please, of the functionality, the purpose of these computers.
Yes, hello, good morning. Eric Carlson, IT Supervisor with the Sheriff's Office. These are laptop computers that will go in the patrol vehicles to replace the current computers that we have today that are aging.
So just an upgrade of existing equipment?
Just an upgrade of existing equipment, yes, sir.
Great, thank you.
Jack?
Yes, does the lease contemplate, with technology changing every 6 months, upgrades to the software and any of the other components?
The lease provides us strictly Windows 7 as software, and the sheriff will handle the rest of the software outside of this lease.
Move approval.
Second. It's been moved and seconded to approve the competitive bid number 100 for the Delta Wireless issue just discussed. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to skip down to Facility Services, Atwood Fire Station Modular Addition, item number 6.
Chairman Wygant, members of the board, Rob Unholz, Capital Improvements Manager with Facility Services. The item before you today is a recommendation to take the following actions associated with Atwood Fire Station 180 Modular Addition. Approve plans and specs and authorize staff to solicit bids for the project. Approve a resolution authorizing the Director of Facility Services to award and execute a contract in an amount not to exceed $295,900 upon review of and approval of County Council and Risk Management, and delegating authority to approve any necessary change orders consistent with County Purchasing Manual and Public Contract Code. Provide or approve the attached budget revision appropriating $22,390 to the Capital Projects Fund project account, offset by revenue from Zone 193, North Auburn Ophir Fire. In October 2008, a professional services agreement was approved for architectural and engineering services for the Atwood addition. The project consists primarily of an addition of a modular building for firefighter housing. The work also includes interior finishes and new fire alarm system, electrical mechanical upgrades, as well as site work, accessibility improvements, and landscaping for the existing project and site. With the assistance of Lionakis, the design's been completed and the project's ready to bid. The architect's estimate of probable construction cost is $269,000. In order to proceed with this project, it is recommended that your board approve the plans and specifications. Total project cost is estimated to be $472,390, including $295,900 for construction and contingency, and $176,490 for design, project management, fees, and construction administration. In order to fully fund this project, the attached budget revision is required, appropriating the $22,390 to the Capital Projects Funds project account, which will be offset by the revenue from Zone 193 of the North Auburn Ophir Fire. Be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Questions of the board members? Jack?
Yes, how certain are we with regards to this estimated cost of $269,000? Is that a rough estimate, or how?
That's a detailed estimate through the contract with Lionakis. They utilize a sub-consultant to do cost estimates. Typically, we're fairly close, and we've had the good fortune of that over the past several years.
Excellent, thank you.
Jennifer?
Rob, thank you, and thanks to Lionakis and your staff for putting this together. I do have one concern on this as it relates, and I absolutely support the proposal. I'm concerned in terms of the environmental clearance in our statement that it is exempt from CEQA. It says that it would be exempt if it provides for operation, repair, maintenance, or minor alteration of existing structures or facilities not expanding existing uses. How does this not expand the existing uses?
Firefighter housing is currently accommodated on-site. So what this is doing is it's moving some of that housing down to the adjacent office building and training. So it's still on the same site on the existing, adjacent to the existing building.
But there won't be additional staff?
No additional firefighters. It's to accommodate existing staff.
Excellent. Thank you. That was my concern.
Jim?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Having served on that Placer Consolidated Fire District Board for 16 years and attended many a meeting in that Butler building that was built back in the early 70s, and seeing the facilities that the firefighters are in now, this is much needed. It's long overdue. I think it was the early part of the last decade that we finally put a modular in to house our staff, operations staff, and also have a training room. And it's too bad at that time we couldn't afford to add-on for our firefighters. So this is long overdue. I clearly see the need for it, and I'm very pleased that it's coming forward. And I will make a motion to approve this project.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the plans and specifications, adopt the authorizing resolution, and do a budget revision, which requires a roll call vote. But is there anyone from the public who'd like to address this issue? Seeing none, why don't we just approve all of them in one motion, but with a roll call, if that's okay with Tony? Ann?
Holmes?
Aye.
Duran?
Yes.
Euler? Montgomery?
Yes.
Weigand?
Yes. Yeah, I think so. That's a smart thing, huh? Okay, the board will now adjourn to closed session so that we have a 10 o'clock timed item, but we have our department budget item, so that would give us more time to deal with that issue uninterrupted, depending on the questions, and so we'll adjourn to closed session now.
The board will go into closed session and take up the items on page 3, item 7, 2 matters involving litigation.
Reconvening after closed session. Tony, would you report out from closed session?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The board has returned from closed session. With regards to significant exposure of litigation, the board has extended yet again the contract for outside counsel assisting in the PCCP. That would be Resource Law Group, increasing the contract amount by another $100,000. The board has also agreed and give authority to the county to participate in the intervening in the case of City of Brisbane versus State Board of Equalization, a sales tax distribution allocation lawsuit, and currently filed in San Francisco Superior Court. That closes this report.
Thank you. We will now take up our 10 o'clock item, and in order to do so, we need to convene as the Placer County Redevelopment Agency and the Placer County Board of Supervisors for a joint public hearing. And we will take up a public hearing to adopt a resolution approving findings and report reuse appraisal pursuant California Health regarding the Silver Bend project. So, Jim.
Good morning, Kathy Donovan, Placer County Redevelopment Agency. The Redevelopment Agency is requesting the County Executive Office and the Redevelopment Agency Board to conduct a public hearing and adopt a resolution approving the findings in the report and reuse appraisal pursuant to Health Code 33433. We have a few slides on the project. It is for the Quartz Ridge project at 360 Silver Bend Way. The agency is requesting authority to enter into disposition, development, and loan agreement with Quartz Ridge Family Apartments, authorize an expenditure of $2 million in redevelopment housing funds for the project. That includes the $350,000 in the pre-development loan you approved last month. Excuse me. And authorizing the redevelopment director or designee to execute the agreements. The project site is at 360 Silver Bend Way, behind the Rayleighs on Lincoln Way in Bowman. The black hash marks are the 6-acre property, and the red boundary is the redevelopment area. I'm sorry, purple boundary. This is a architectural rendering of what the frontage would look like from Silver Bend Way. The community room would be in the front of the development. This is the organization structure with the development company and the management company. It starts with the USA Properties Fund. The developer is Quartz Ridge Family Apartments, which are associates of USA. The construction management and construction company are also affiliates of USA Property Management. The sources and uses, as we're projecting now, are for a $19 million project, 64 units. The agency's contribution would be a total of $2 million for gap financing and $1.215 million for the value of the property. If the property is awarded tax credits in the first round in which the developer will be applying, this is the timeline. The financing announcement for the first round of tax credits is in June. Submittal plans are being worked on now, and that's part of the pre-development loan to the developer, is to develop the architectural and engineering drawings for the improvement plans. Building permit issuance is expected to occur in September. The construction period is just over a year. And the pre-leasing and the move-in would be in 2012. If the tax credits, if the developer's not able to get tax credits in the first round, there's a second round also this year. And then we would look at restructuring possibly the application if it doesn't get funded in the second round, and continue to apply for funding until we get funded. The developer's representative, Steve Gall, is here to answer any questions you might have, and Jim and I would be happy to answer any questions as well.
If I could just chime in, because of the specific requirements of redevelopment state law, the role of the Board of Supervisors, the county, is to hold a public hearing and make findings. But the redevelopment agency makes findings, and then it's actually the redevelopment agency that enters into the agreement with the developer for this project and provides the funding and the promise to convey the property if and when the developer is able to receive all the financing necessary, get all the building permits and so forth, and be ready to construct. Then we make the last funding available and hand over the title to the property right before construction.
Thanks, Jim. So questions of the board members at this time. Jennifer?
Kathy, just so I understand on the tax credit financing piece, if it is not awarded in June of this year, will everything move back on your schedule here, on your timeline, to match any potential future award?
Yes, it would. If it's not funded in this round, the next round is in July, so you're looking at about a 4-month shift. Construction, though, depending on what time of year the project is ready to be built, construction could be delayed slightly. But the timeline should follow pretty close, the same amount of time, about a year and a half.
Thank you.
And I think the DDA allows the developer 3 years of continuing to apply for the tax credits. Sometimes it takes multiple tries before they get it, and that has USA Properties or Quartz Ridge Family Housing. That's what they've told us they've had to do. In other examples in the past of projects that they have successfully completed, but it took them more than one try at the tax credits to be able to get that and then go forward. But after 3 years, we would have the option to do away with the agreement and then start over again if that's what we wanted to do.
The tax credit awards, it's about a 25% of the applications were actually funded, so it's extremely competitive.
Jack?
Yes, I just had a question. It appears that there's been some soil sampling that's taken place on the particular site, and there was mention that the site contains a specific amount of fill. Is there anything with regards to the site's history that would lead to any indication that there may be issues with regards to that fill?
We've had a lot of comments and suggestions that the fill has material that may be toxic. There have been at least 6 studies done from 2000 forward. In that time, that fill existed. I don't know when the fill originally got there, but it was sometime prior to 2000. And then most recently, soil sampling was done per the school siting requirement, which is a federal requirement that the county uses that is very stringent on where you can build using, typically it was designed for where you could build using federal funds to keep federal funds from being used for housing on contaminated sites. So the requirement is very strict, and the soil sampling has demonstrated that none of the levels of any of the heavy metals or any other toxins were above any of the allowed ranges.
Okay, great. And that testing is going to be ongoing, is that correct? Or
when the construction actually occurs, the fill that is removed is tested, and then it's determined which site it goes to. Some sites take different types of contaminated soils. So it would be the fill is tested when it comes out, and any new fill that comes onto the site is tested as well.
Great, thank you very much.
No other questions? This is a public hearing, so I'll open up the public hearing to anyone who would like to address the board on this. Please state your name for the record.
Steve Gall from USA Properties Fund. We're the developer working on this project with the redevelopment agency staff. Just wanted to say we've been working on this thing for a year and a half now, I think, and sort of finding problems and knocking them down and refreshing the approvals. We all thought we were starting on a relatively short journey back in 2009, and it's turned out to be a much longer journey to get to the podium today with respect to obtaining the entitlements, verifying the environmental issues that you articulated, working on the design, working on the plan for the tax credits, and as Kathy pointed out, the history of the recent history of our business is that you find a project, and when you're working with the redevelopment agency of the jurisdiction that you're in, that you come up with a strategy to sort of just keep chipping away at it with respect to the financing until the tax credits fall into place, and I think that's exactly what we're doing here. Staff's been great to work with. We've had a lot of work getting to where we are. They've done a lot of great work, and I think our team's done a lot of great work, and we appreciate your consideration. So if you have any questions, if you feel free to ask them.
Yeah, I actually wanted to follow up on the issue that Jack raised about the soil testing. It seems, if I'm reading the letter signed by Wes, I'm not sure how he pronounces his last name, Bourgault, from Placer County Health and Human Services Department, Environmental Health, there is a notation in here that Crazen does conclude regarding the import fill material that potential for threats exist. Now, my understanding is, as we move through this process, we will continue to evaluate those threats through a series of ongoing soil tests. If indeed they do materialize as legitimate threats, they will be dealt with through removal of the affected soil and import of clean fill. Is that correct?
That's correct. I think my take of the letter that we just recently came out last week is it confirms sort of the work that we've been doing these many months about testing and retesting and digging to the bottom. And I think that the takeaway for me in this letter is that the thresholds upon which this project has any concerns about the soil are below thresholds on most of the categories identified in the letter. And as we go in there and we process this 36,000 cubic yards of dirt, the removal of anything that needs to be removed will be taken care of, and clean fill material will be put into place. And so it'll be a sampling in place kind of a program, and that when we the site will be substantially better and better than it is today when we finish the completion of this project.
Absolutely, and thank you for saying that, because one of the things that I really just want to give some reassurance to the general public is that this is not the last word on it. We will continue to look at this, to analyze it. If problems arise, they will be dealt with in the best possible way. The alternative that seems to be being proposed by some folks is that we just leave the soils there at whatever level of contamination they're at. Currently, we do nothing, and instead, in the proposal that's before us, we actually make the situation better in terms of the soil and any potential soil contamination that's found there. So just really wanted to make sure people understand that if something does come up, it will absolutely be dealt with. We're not just going to turn a blind eye to it and say, oh, well, we had this great soils report. So thank you.
Correct. So far, there's been extensive testing done, but we're not completed. We will do more testing just to make sure that the site is clean and safe before any kind of construction takes place. But all the testing that's been done, which has been pretty extensive so far, the bigger issue, certainly dollar-wise, is just the fact that the fill, there's a lot of fill brought in that's structurally not going to work for building on top of, so we will need to excavate that and remove it off-site. But so far, it does not appear that any of it would need to go to a special facility for contamination. But we will continue those tests.
Thank you. Is there anyone else from the public who would like to address the board on this? Seeing no one, I will close the public hearing and bring it back to the board. So, Kathy, Jim, our first item A is to adopt the resolution approving the findings and a report and reuse appraisal. Public hearing first. Well, we just did a public hearing.
So moved.
Second.
It's moved and seconded to approve item A and the Silver Bend Corchwood project. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. And item B is another public hearing regarding resolution approving a 433 report and reuse appraisal. Any additional comments on that portion?
No different.
Is there anyone, so I'll open the public hearing. Is there anyone from the public who would like to address this part? Seeing no one, I'll close the public hearing and bring it back to the board.
I move that we, having had the public hearing, we adopt a resolution approving a 433 report and reuse appraisal and approve disposition of real property 360 Silver Bend Way, approve a disposition development and loan agreement and related documents for Ford's Rich Family Apartments, authorize an expenditure of $2 million in redevelopment housing funds, and authorize the redevelopment director or his designee to execute the aforementioned agreements and associated documents.
I'll second that. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thanks. We will now take up item 5, departments, county budget, and we'll start off with Tom Miller making a few comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What I'd like to do is kind of put a little bit of a historical perspective on the workshop that your board is conducting today. If you go back to the great and glorious days of 2006 and thereabouts through early 2007, the Board of Supervisors, even before that, really didn't have a February workshop. There may be a report about whether or not the budget was on track or revenues, but we really did not have mid-year budget workshops of this nature. When the economy started drastically turning into negative in, I believe it was 2007, we actually brought an early report to the board in that late that fall, I think it was November, said that the sales tax was dropping off the charts. Even at that time when gas was very expensive, in bringing in more sales tax into that, we saw huge declines in revenues, and your board was very quick to take action to freeze the hiring of staff and then also to instigate 4 mandatory days off. At that time, there were quite a few folks who thought your board was being too reactive because of taking budget actions in that particular nature. Time clearly showed that your board took the right decisions and understood that finances were about to change significantly for California counties and was really leading the way in terms of reducing expenditures way in advance of any other California counties. The next 2 years, these February workshops were more of, and still in that declining, significantly declining mode, property tax declining, sales tax declining, setting the stage for what would be the upcoming budget year. And it was very important, still is important today, the February timing of directions and now into March, as you'll see as we go further through the presentation today, in terms of starting at the beginning of next fiscal year in a sound position. Historically, what all counties and cities have done is adopt a preliminary budget starting July 1, because we have a fiscal year, July 1 till the end of June, and then going through budget workshops in August, making final adjustments in September. And that always works well when you have increasing revenues because you can always make adjustments. But clearly, when you have declining revenues, you can't make adjustments 1 quarter into your fiscal year in terms of further restricting your expenditures. So especially the last 2 years, it's been very important for the board to provide direction to staff, looking at, in February, this is about where we are. Starting July 1, we need to have a budget, an operating budget that is recognition of those declining revenues. In each of the last 2 fiscal years, your board has led the way, I'd say in the region as well, in terms of recognizing those challenges, hitting them head on in very difficult situations that has led to us of having the least amount of layoffs of any county in Northern California. We don't even bother tracking further south. But clearly, 17 layoffs in about 2.5 years is something that shows the credit that you've been able to do while still providing services. The departments have reacted in very positive ways to not only reduce expenditures, but also recast how services are provided, whether it's alternative service delivery or working through vendors in a different way to maintain a very high level of services. what you have before you today is a little bit different than the last two Februaries. And in fact, we're recommending, as your board is aware, that we have continuing workshops throughout March, because although we're seeing some flattening in the decline in terms of revenues that you'll be hearing more detail about today, we're also looking at the multi-year impact on departmental budgets, whether or not they can sustain the operations with these declining revenues, and how that's been distributed throughout different types of county services in terms of deeper hits in certain areas as opposed to other areas. But we're also faced with, on a statewide level, realignment. As your board is aware, the governor's proposal that, if carried out, could actually, we believe, have some better services to the citizens that we all serve, rather than the state being the director but not the provider of services, where your board having better leeway and given the revenue base to provide those services would provide a better way for the citizens to get those services being delivered a little bit more locally. But a lot of details in those have to be worked out. So the reason why we're looking at these the budget workshops and concluding in later March, or perhaps even early in April, the first meeting in April, is to have your board try and get a grasp of what is likely to occur in terms of where we've been for the last 2 years in terms of our property tax or sales tax, strains that you'll hear about some of our individual services that were provided in terms of the context in the next month and a half, but also trying to get a glimpse of, if realignment occurs, what is likely to occur back to some of our departments. And if all the realignment that's being put on the table occurs first this wave, and there's a second wave that's out there, then there'll be revenues coming back, but will those revenues be sufficient to actually provide those services, or what is the state expectations? What are the departments talking about if, for example, if parole management comes back? How many more probation folks would have to be there? If we're looking at a jail population that is turned back to the county in terms of holding those folks, how many individuals on an annual basis we have? Should we provide alternative services more deeply to keep those folks better managed and hopefully productive out in the community? These are the kind of things that we're going to be talking about over the next couple of meetings beyond this particular board meeting. But this is a different set of circumstances than the last two February discussions. Your board has obviously taken this to task and dealt well in terms of the budgetary and the services, providing the services, and I think the actions that you've taken in the past have spoke well in terms of the fiscal management and the delivery of services to the citizens that is too oftentimes not gone recognized. But I think going over today's will be similar to kind of the presentations that you've had last February's, the current status, revenues and expenditures, the impacts of this decline, and then looking more forward to the next two meetings in March of whether or not what's happening in public safety, what's happening in health and human services, and in other community services, kind of getting a better feel for those more deeply in terms of the revenue issues and expenditure issues, and then also this realignment package that the governor is proposing and the state legislature seems to be embracing. But I just want to kind of frame up, before Graham starts his presentation, how this relates over the rest of the meetings in March, because they are different than the years past.
Okay, with that, Graham?
Good morning. I'm Graham Canals. I'm your Finance and Budget Operations Manager, and I have the pleasure, or perhaps the misfortune, to come before you and talk today about some of our budget detail, both in the context of our current year and looking at what some of the challenges are that we will be facing over the coming months. Assuming that we can... Okay, there we go. This morning we'll go through an update related to our county budget and financial status. We'll provide some context in terms of our 11-12 budget, in terms of the development, discuss some of the challenge areas that you'll be talking about over the coming board meetings, and then some of our next steps as we move forward in packaging together the 2011-12 budget. To do that, we'll go through a brief history in terms of how we got here, go through prior board actions that you have taken going all the way back to 2003, some of the strategic actions that have put this county in the position that it's in. We'll do a quick check-in related to our 10-11 budget in terms of how we're doing and what our expectations are related to the current year. Talk about the challenge related to 11-12, and then there are some specific areas of focus that Tom just referenced that we will touch on towards the end of the presentation. Population may seem like a bit of an odd place to start when talking about a county budget, but specifically in this county, population has been a very big driver in terms of service demands and revenues. County service demands and revenues are driven by population, also the economy and state actions. And whereas statewide over the past 10 years there's been 12% population growth in the neighborhood of 34 million residents back in 2000, growing to 38 million this past year, here in Placer we've had 28% growth, which is nearly 100,000 additional residents here in the county over the past 10 years, which makes us the fastest growing county in the state just by a hair over the past 10 years. Well, when we began this decade, the annual population growth rate was in the neighborhood of 5%. That's tapered off substantially both here in Placer and more broadly across the state. Last year, our annual growth was in the 1.5% range. So our growth in population has certainly begun to taper off. 88% of that population growth that has occurred has been in cities, in the incorporated areas of the county. And from a county service impact, the primary growth that has occurred for us as a result of that population has been in the areas of public safety and also in health and human services related to standard service impacts for population growth and also the realities of state law and mandated, both state and federal law and mandated programs that we carry out on behalf of the state. The service demands are largely provided in the incorporated areas, but interesting note is that whereas the per capita property tax, which is our largest fund source, in the incorporated areas averages about $135 per person, where a lot of our service demands have increased, the county-wide per capita property tax is a much higher number. So we have the very place where most of our population growth is occurring is also the place where, on a per capita basis, we're receiving less property tax revenue. So flashing back to 2000, when things were strong and looking good, unemployment was very low nationally, statewide, and certainly in Placer County. In fact, we were all the way down to 3.1% unemployment, which was a record historical low. And we've now shifted to the other side of that pendulum in 2000 with record high unemployment, upwards of 11.5% in this county, the highest that we've ever seen. And Tom referenced some of the changes and challenges that we've experienced over the past few years with respect to revenue. From a land wealth perspective and property tax revenue, when we look go back to 2007-8 in terms of where we were, we had about $138 million in property tax revenue. Slight increase was anticipated in 2008-9 up to the $143 million range, and it's that midpoint of that year whereby the tanking of the economy began to occur and reductions in our revenues, as Tom referenced, began to come to fruition. When we look at where we're at in the current year, property tax is estimated to be $121 million, and that results in a 15% reduction over a 2-year period of time, a $21 million loss in property tax revenue to the county. Certainly the economy has been rough across the board. Our larger general fund revenue collections have experienced a hit as well, going from $349 million down to $332 million over the course of a few years. That's a 7% reduction in our total general fund revenues. And there's been discussion with your board in the past relative to what's happening on the real estate side of things, which drives the property tax. And the unfortunate reality over the past few years is that the number of property sales has gone down, which locks in so we keep the lower property tax base on more properties. The sales that have occurred have been at much lower values than has been the case historically. And certainly anyone who's picked up the paper has been familiar with the growing number of foreclosures that have occurred over the last few years. New construction, which had been at a relatively quick pace for some period of time in response to the growth in our population, has tapered off dramatically, almost reduced to zero at a point in time. Our larger county revenue picture, first to note that revenue generally will track the change in the population and economy. As more people come in and the economy is strong, we can anticipate that we're going to experience some additional revenue. And when we look all the way back to the year Prop 13 was approved, and we compare that to where we're at today, there has certainly been significant unadjusted revenue growth. And by unadjusted, I mean not factoring in inflation and not factoring in the significant increase in our population base. But when we look at it on a per capita basis, as adjusted by inflation, the revenue back then was $393 per resident. And when we flash forward to 2009-10, that revenue on a per capita basis has decreased to $355 per resident. That's a 10% per capita revenue decline over the course of 30-plus years.
Excuse me, Grant, yes. And that's total revenue, not just property tax revenue?
This is total, yes, this is total revenue. So it would include the property tax, transient occupancy tax, sales tax, and intergovernmental transfers as well. Yes. So we've had this 10% decline that's occurred over that period of time, almost all of which has been just in the last 3 years. 9% of that has occurred in the last 3 years. So this will get, Supervisor Wygant, to your question related to how we break this down and that this reflects all of our revenues. This shows, going back to Proposition 13, the different categories of revenues that come into the county and how they've changed on a per capita basis over time. What's interesting is that although there's been a number of ups and downs throughout that 30-plus years of time, we're pretty close to where we were back in Proposition 13 days, with the exception of the taxes category, which has certainly come down. And this chart, although it goes to 2009-10, I should note that when we think about where we're going to land in 10-11 in the current year, that taxes number is anticipated to be even lower. When we look at the other side of the ledger, talking about the expenditure side, from a per capita basis, we find that it's nearly identical to what it was back in 1978. Within $1 on a per capita basis, our expenditures are the same. Certainly in a rough economy, some expenditures get driven up while others are driven down, in part a reflection of the budget management approach that will be taken to try to smooth the rough spots out over time. Most of the functional areas within the county have been relatively flat or had some sort of decline over that period. On the public safety side, certainly there have been increases, and Health and Human Services, in response to some state law changes, has had some increases as well. This, similar to what we looked at on the revenue side, this shows the change in expenditures by functional area going back to Proposition 13. And as I mentioned, with the primary exception of public safety, which has been a priority of the board, there has been relatively flat or some decline in each of those areas over a period of time. Health and public assistance had a slight increase for a few years, which has now come down over the past couple of years in response to impacts of the state budget in our local economy. So when we combine the revenue picture with the expenditure picture, in terms of what's been happening over the last several years, we go from revenues outpacing expenditures for a number of years, and then the paths crossed about midway through 2008. And that's when your board very proactively took a number of actions to help address that gap and to bring expenditures and revenues more in line. Specifically, I should note that even though the expenditures have, as the revenues dropped, the expenditures were slightly higher than that for the last couple of years, the county budget has always been balanced. There are a number of solutions that have been put into place to ensure that each of our budgets is firmly in balance. That gap has been closed through the phased use of reserves as approved by your board, your board's direction relative to one-time and ongoing solutions to contain costs, and redirected facilities and other funding to core operations as a temporary strategy to try to smooth the service impacts over time. Clearly, there are cost drivers that we experience that push cost pressure up with respect to our expenditures. We've talked about these somewhat before. Rising health insurance premiums, which have been increasing at a relatively rapid rate for a number of years. They've tapered off somewhat, although are still a cost pressure in the 5% range. Increased PERS contributions due to lower investment returns, and we anticipate that those the increases in the contributions we would experience over the next several years. The county's aging workforce, the older, wiser workforce, as the additional number of folks retire, there are some cost drivers related to us as we have both the retirement obligation and to the extent that there's a function that needs to be filled that would have an additional cost to it. Utilities and other normal costs of doing business that do increase over time. And there are a couple of new ones that are worth spending a moment talking about. One, fixed costs, whereby our county workforce is somewhat smaller than it was just a few years ago. But we have a number of fixed costs that don't change consistent with our total staffing. So, for example, our Acorn system, whether we have in the neighborhood of 3,000 employees or 2,000 employees, our fixed costs are relatively static, and those fixed costs are now spread to fewer staff than they have been historically. We've also been faced with a number of unfunded cost shifts from the state, which have required your board's action in terms of local resolution, coming up with a solution to have a more sustainable budget as we move forward. So, prior board actions that you've taken, first, going back to 2003, when the economy was still strong, your board adopted a number of financial policies in an attempt to best position the county when things weren't so good. The first was a budget and financial policy, which is intended to guide both the current year and long-term financial planning. Key principles include utilizing one-time revenues for one-time costs, utilizing a generally conservative approach in the way that we approach the budget to allow for greater flexibility of your board, and also smoothing when things are not so strong with respect to the economy, general adherence to federal and state budget regulations, and basically providing an overall context for the budget decisions that you would be making on an annual basis. In 2003, your board also approved a debt management policy to create a framework for approaching debt. This is the when, the why, and the how. It's how much debt would be okay. Not using debt for operations. Utilizing a pay-as-you-go approach whenever feasible. That new development should pay its own way, and with respect to the debt issuance that does occur, focusing on high-priority capital projects, self-supporting financing, and leveraging of available revenues whenever possible. In 2006, your board also approved an OPEB, other post-employment benefits policy, to address the retiree health, dental, and other benefit costs. This was intended to provide some smart planning to ensure that the obligation was being appropriately planned for and budgeted. And this policy was just revised by your board in September of this past fall to include advance funding for all new hires. So the new policy requires that 50% of the liability would be paid upon any new hires. That amount's currently in the $52,000 range. And the 80/20 healthcare cost sharing that has been put into place over the past 2 years has decreased that unfunded liability by $21.4 million. Your board will have a more thorough OPEB presentation with the new updated actuarial in the coming meetings. Other strategic board actions that have been taken, certainly labor adjustments related to the hiring freeze that was initially put in place back in December of 2007, right as the economy was about to head off the cliff. The hiring freeze has led to 320 fewer filled positions today than back in 2007 and due to attrition. As Tom referenced, there have been minimal layoffs in this county relative to other local agencies, and they've been focused on areas where there have been reduced workload, total of 17 over the course of the last 3 years. Your board has put in place some mandatory time off for employees as an attempt to contain some costs and increase health and pension cost sharing. Also, as in an attempt to have some smoothing of costs, there's been some utilization of reserves. As I mentioned, a total of $9.8 million in general fund reserves have been used since 2008-9 to create a short-term umbrella to get us through this part in the economy. Doing so does tend to help stabilize the service levels so that there are not significant spikes down and up in terms of our service levels. That also can avoid a county unemployment burden to the extent that folks are laid off. The county pays those 100% of those costs, and that has been very rare here in this county, in this economy. Internal service funds reserves have been utilized as well to try to smooth those costs. Total $8.5 million has been used since 2008-9, and we're currently in the midst of a 4-year plan to smooth those costs, to make our internal department budgets somewhat more manageable in light of this economy. This just shows what's occurred with the utilization of the general fund reserve over the past few years. You can see we began in 2008-9 with a total $18 million general fund reserve. Through the current year, that will be brought down to the $8.2 million figure. So, county workforce. There's been discussion with your board in the past relative to the number of allocated positions and how that's changed over time. This chart shows that over the past few years, the number of allocated positions has remained relatively static. But what really has changed is the number of filled positions. In 2008-9, there were 2,542 filled positions in the county. As of where we're at midpoint in 2010-11, there are 2,222 filled positions in the county. That's a decrease of 320 due to attrition. And this chart shows the difference between allocated positions and filled on a per capita basis over time. Historically, up to about 2001, the county averaged about 1 position per 100 population. And when we look at the number of filled positions today, we're at about 2/3 that level. So 0.65 positions per 100 county population. Breaking that down by functional areas over the past 3 years, you can see that Health and Human Services has decreased the number of filled positions by 20%, 17 in land use. The general government area, which includes library, clerk recorder, includes both the board and CEO offices, there's been a 15% decrease. And in finance and public safety, it's been in the 9 and 7% ranges, respectively. So there is this growing gap between the number of allocated and the number of filled positions. As part of the base budget analysis for department budgets, we'll be analyzing that, and we may be bringing a recommendation to resolve that issue back to your board at a future meeting. So 10-11, how are we doing? The midway point through the year, revenues and expenditures are generally in line with our expectations in terms of the budget. There are no big surprises, and the note here is that whereas in the past few years there have been substantial potential state budget reductions in the middle of the year, none of that is on the table this year. There's a whole bunch of stuff relative to July 1 going forward that creates risk for us, but not relative to our 10-11 budget. What is relevant is that our margin in our budget is much tighter than it's been in the past. The overall revenues are lower, and the revenues that are coming in, particularly those from the state, are coming in much slower than they have historically. There's $8 million in deferrals impacting the county in this year alone, and even those payments that are not deferred are coming in much later than they have in the past. It's the board-directed expenditure savings that have provided the flexibility to be able to manage through with this tighter margin that's in our budget. Bottom line is, as I mentioned, it's the early and decisive board actions going all the way back to 2003 that have positioned the county relatively well in light of the economy. So looking ahead for 2011-12, initial estimate that was presented to your board in December suggests a $7.5 million combined deficit in the general and public safety funds. That includes a 5% further decline in property tax revenue and a 2% very tentative increase in the sales tax. And relative to sales tax, it's gone up about 4 of the last 6 months, but the amounts that it has gone up have been very small. And I don't think it would take much by way of a reduction in consumer confidence for that to evaporate completely. So it's certainly a risk area as we go forward. There's no initial planned use of reserves as part of this number. And as I mentioned, the general fund reserves now rest at $8.2 million. Other assumptions related to 11-12, continuing existing labor adjustments related to health and retirement cost sharing, and department-based budgets, which were just submitted at the end of last week, were requested to absorb a number of cost increases and any losses of one-time revenues. That will likely result in some reductions on the services operations side, and the extent to which there will be impacts will be analyzed, discussed with departments, and then brought back to your board for further discussions. At this moment, our adjusted deficit is in the $2.8 million range relative to the general fund, and we believe that in light of all the challenges ahead of us that rest before us, if we pull the state out of the equation, that our local challenge is certainly difficult but manageable. So quick snapshot related to 2011-12, continued hiring freeze. As I mentioned, expect some reduction relative to service levels, restrained spending, and exploration of additional alternative service delivery options where appropriate. Modest economic stabilization. We're not out of the woods yet, but we're potentially getting there. It feels like there might be some light out there somewhere relative to what's happening with unemployment and the market. Continued decline in real estate property values. Excuse me. Relative to foreclosures and reassessments. Basically, revenue is likely to remain relatively flat or perhaps even a slight decline as we move forward. Challenges. As I mentioned, the local deficit is difficult but certainly manageable. We have the state budget impact, $30 million in funding at risk for the county, potential elimination of redevelopment agencies, cuts in a number of areas across the county, the state deferral impacts that have been discussed, certainly the state's proposed realignment, which appears to be tentatively moving forward to some degree within the legislature. The one piece that's most relevant to talk about related to realignment is that on the parole side of things, there appears to be a growing thought within the legislature and the administration that it's not a good fit for a realignment. That's actually a piece that may end up getting pulled out. Having said that, the administration is firm that they still need to hit the target dollar number, so if that gets pulled out, the question would be, well, what gets put in? Bottom line, whether or not there's a statewide special election in June relative to tax increase extensions, it's unlikely that we're going to have sufficient clarity relative to what the state impacts are going to be until after June. Other challenge areas specific to the county, certainly Health and Human Services, it would be realignment, also risks and opportunities related to health care reform. The South Placer Jail that your board has discussed somewhat in the past, the public safety realignment that I just referenced, and there are some workload impacts related to state law changes in the public safety area that will be discussed as we go forward. On the fire response side, in terms of county fire, there are impacts related to the reduced property tax revenues, which have strained those that budget area, and potential new charge proposals from CAL FIRE that we'll have to manage through over the course of the next couple of years. In the public works area, cash flow relative to state deferrals, and also declines in our road fund. So, next steps. First, from an 11-12 budget development standpoint, as I mentioned, departments' base budgets were just submitted, so we'll be at the staff level meeting with departments and working through that and bring back to your board relevant challenge areas in terms of what the impacts may be. Additional upcoming workshops related to OPEB and that new updated actuarial, Health and Human Services, veterans, and the library, certainly public safety and fire, and then wrapping up with public works, land use, and facilities. Once we go through that full discussion, outline of the challenge areas, we would come back to your board for further direction relative to the proposed budget. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Questions? Jim?
You said that there's 8.5 million deferred payments from the state to the county. Which departments are hit the hardest with those deferred payments?
Primarily two. It's in the public works area and health and human services.
Thank you.
Jack?
I guess it was a very good presentation, Graham, and I guess the operative word is don't hurt the messenger or the message.
You're entitled to do either.
You've got a tough job, and I certainly do appreciate you putting this all together for us so we can take a look at where we've been, where we are, and where we're going. I did have a question on slide number 10. You had mentioned that county expenditures, per capita expenditures, were the same as in 1978. I was wondering if somewhere down the road you can quantify what the cost of those expenditures are to the county over the same time period.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So that would be what the cost was back in 2000.
Has it been, are we now paying 1,000 times more? I think that would be some really good information to let folks know where we are. And that's it.
Jennifer?
Graham, thank you. Great presentation, very well put together, and very comprehensible. One of the things that really leaps out at me is the issue facing us with the general fund. And something that was recently brought to my attention relates to financing, or actually how we pay for the South Placer Jail. This board took action to basically use county monies that we had in hand to pay to construct the jail. But it's my understanding that we also have the option to go back and look at actually financing that and recouping the costs that we've spent out of general fund monies back to the county. So I would like to see an analysis of what that would mean. What implications would that have? I mean, interest rates are historically low. Some of our policies actually support debt issuance for those high-priority capital projects. And you know, while we have a pay-as-we-go approach, our caveat on that is whenever feasible. And I think it's important, given some of the reductions that we're looking at in county services, to look at the potential of actually financing the jail, bringing those monies back into the general fund to try to support some of those county services that would otherwise be cut. I have about 1,000 questions for you that I'm not going to go into today, but I would like to sit down with you and go over these individually just for my own clarity. But I think the biggest thing that really jumped out at me is where we have spent those county dollars instead of financing, not just the jail, but there's some other facilities that we did the same thing. What opportunities do we have to go back, evaluate that, and potentially look at locking in a very low interest rate, bringing some of those funds back into the county for immediate use to support services?
Certainly be happy to take a look at that.
Kirk?
Yeah, on that note, let me just be clear, I'm in no way, shape, or form am I in support of creating debt encumbrances to fund ongoing operations. I believe that capital improvements being paid for largely by impact fees that were collected one time has been a very reasonable and prudent policy of this board for a number of years, and in no way, shape, or form would I look at go back and creating debt, new obligations that would have to be paid off over time simply to fund ongoing operations. I think it's incumbent upon this board to manage operational costs down. And so while certainly, you know, any supervisor is welcome to receive additional information, I just want it out there right now. There's no way that I would support us refinancing and creating additional debt for operational expenses.
Comments, I guess. I'm presuming we've actually run some numbers, assuming some of the more worst-case scenarios with the state. That's a question. I'm not sure I want to know the answer, but it's and you don't have to tell me what they are. Just I'm assuming we're doing that. We're looking at the budgets in light of what the state's proposing, and I guess. So as we move forward, there are two things that strike me in the governor's proposal generally. One is I was struck with a lot of this discussion being very provocative, some for better and some for worse. Some of the realignment notions I think have huge merit in that I'm sure local government can perform a lot of those tasks much better and much more efficiently. I think Placer County actually reflects that in a range of ways. But along with it comes cost shift, and if, as it relates to jails, for example, they don't cover our cost of operation, even if we're at a very efficient cost, that's going to be a burden that's shifted to the taxpayers of Placer County because the state has refused, in my view, to deal with its fundamental budgetary issues over the last 8 years. So I'm concerned about that. So thank you for the therapy on that one. But so there are some provocative proposals in there. There are some provocative things that worry me, like redevelopment agencies. I can't imagine our governor, after his local government experience, thinking that it's a bad idea to have redevelopment agencies. But beyond that, it strikes me that knowing how the state, in my opinion, again, has essentially been frozen in its inability to deal with its budgetary issues over 8 years, I just can't see the state making some of these incredibly provocative decisions, for better or worse, very quickly. So my view is that they've sort of waited for the economy to turn around, and it hasn't, and it doesn't appear to be turning around quickly in the short run. So I guess I'd like to see those projections run, pondering those kinds of thoughts. I don't exactly know what the concepts essentially ought to look like, but because the state just continues to essentially operate in a deficit mode by doing these gimmicks and quick fixes and shifting of burdens, that's going to blow up some point down the line, and I guess I want that thought about and how that would impact those of us in Placer County and our ability to deal with this. I appreciate the comment that barring the state, it looks like we may have bottomed out and now have control over being able to maintain our budget and move forward, but the state clearly has not, and I think that focus ought to be very thoroughly vetted by our staff as we go through these budgetary times.
So, Supervisor Wygant, two thoughts related to that. The first is that we, at the department level and a more global level, continue to analyze what the impacts could be relative to a state proposed realignment. We've been engaged in those discussions with our statewide colleagues relative to how that's moving along and what some of the challenge areas may be and what we would need to struggle with locally to the extent that any of that comes to fruition. On the relative to what's happening currently at the state level, both houses on Friday in their budget committees approved an initial framework of a budget. They're each, the full Assembly and Senate will be going through procedural votes today, this afternoon, to move the budget along for reconciliation between the two houses beginning next week. What's relevant about that is that while the plans are relatively along the lines of what the governor proposed, with some tweaks to it, the plans were put together predominantly by the Democrats, and you have the Democrats in control of the Assembly and the Senate, and so we have the dynamic that's existed in the past, whereby you have a governor's proposal, you have the majority party that moves forward with its version of the plan, and then the differences need to be reconciled. The barrier of getting the votes for whatever the plan is, whether it's an all reductions plan or if it includes a realignment or if there are tax increases or not, the barrier is a very real one, and the legislature has yet to get there. Right. So the governor still continues to assert that by mid-March it's got to be done, and folks in the legislature are talking about it as if that's going to happen, but there's no path yet that's been clearly identified where there'd be a sufficient number of votes to make it happen under any scenario.
And half of the solution is the continued tax increases with the special election for June, and the outcome of that could turn everything else on its head in addition. So we just need to be prepared for that. I mean, we'll deal with it as best as we can, but I'd like to see what specific implications that has to our budget and our ability to deliver the services that we need to provide here in Placer County. Anything else? So you don't need anything from us on this, just information, unless some board members want to propose some direction or other concerns or considerations, but we can always do that also additionally to this hearing. So, Tom, did you have some?
No, that was it.
Jennifer.
Robert, I would like to request that we do have a look at the analysis that I suggested, which is what it might mean to go back and refinance the jail and some of those other facilities. I certainly respect Supervisor Euler's position on this, but I don't think it would be any harm for this board to hear what that option would be and understand the implications of that. So I would like to have that brought back to this board in this forum at some point in the near future.
Absolutely, and I think any other board members who have similar requests, regardless of what they are, be worthwhile to consider any and all options at this state of the game.
Thank you.
Thanks. Jeff?
Yeah, I just wanted to add and to jump in there. I'm not going to go back. I wasn't here when the decision was made to use those funds for the jail, but I do think it's important that we take a look at all of our options. And I do have a concern with regards to using those funds for services, but periodically, folks refinance on a lot of different levels for a lot of different reasons. Capital improvements are refinanced periodically, so it would just be good just to have that information, food for thought on a moving forward basis. So, thanks.
All right. Well, with that, we are actually adjourned at 11:10, unless I missed something. Nope. We're adjourned. Thank you.